Welcome to the show, everybody. Michael with CoronaVirusDiaries, and today I'm reconnecting with Luis Gabriel Aguilera, an artist, teacher, and social justice activist. Luis, thanks for jumping on the show today.
Thanks for having me back here, Micah. So
So,
tell me what's going on.
yeah,
I know
so
you're
yeah,
I know you're really near the epicenter of what's happening right now.
yeah, it's pretty intense. I was up about 4 a.m. Last night. I didn't even really know that there was stuff that was escalating as it was. I was working late into the evening. Friend hit me up, and the city was on fire. So it went till about 4 a.m. till I just finally fell asleep, got back up. And my understanding is just recently I saw a live stream of Al Sharpton speaking at the location of the murder of George Floyd. There is looting that's happening again in Midway on Lake Street. My understanding is that they're in some capacity locking it down. I don't know if you can go so far as to say a martial law state of emergency, but there's certainly there's friends saying being sent home from work, and they're closing businesses on the strip now in preparation. And there is also a large protest that's being organized to target the Hennepin County Government Center downtown Minneapolis starting in a few hours. So I have recently made the decision that although I am not not promoting looting and violence, as a videographer, photographer, media personality, I feel obligated to go and document what is happening, and it's conflicting. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts because, you know, we tried this earlier. I was a little bit emotional because I started getting really paranoid about, honestly, race. I'm a white man. I'm sitting here talking about some stuff that's happening in my community that was a racial crime, and it's a little concerning going into an environment. I don't believe that I would be targeted. I actually had a friend who we go spar back and forth with discussions sometimes, but they said something along the lines of, you won't have to worry about it because you're white privilege. And it kind of rubs me wrong, but at the same time, we're sitting here talking about a black man that was unarmed and subdued, that was murdered. So who am I to say anything? So curious to hear your
You know,
thoughts on
maybe,
you coming
maybe,
out and
maybe,
speaking.
maybe
And
let me tell you one thing before we start. Is I want to thank you for having me on this show for the last
of
few
course,
times, but it's a thank you in the sense that it's an inquisitiveness on your part to ask the right questions and ask questions in general of someone who's been in some pretty dire straits in his or her life as a male Latino. And one of the things that a lot of folks, you know, we hear about it, like give folks some voice in the wilderness, is to provide that outlet, and that's what you're doing. And
fine.
just try to understand that conflict within you can be subsided to a certain extent if you continue on that inquisitive path of asking the other, the quote unquote other, who isn't really the other, right? What's going on? Tell me what needs to get done. Let me know, you know, fill in the gaps of knowledge that I don't have because I haven't personally lived that life. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of great journalists do is they actually ask the other person, what's going on? Tell us what's going on in your own words, and in finding the value of those activities, we start to get to the truth. You know, so I think that's admirable that you're doing these shows
Thank you.
and that we're now doing this and trying to cover something really extremely
It's gone
important.
international,
It's gone international,
which is,
and I'm afraid that it's global as well, and it's going to be global for the next few
I mean,
days, and
Hong
hopefully
Kong
not
is
too long.
seeing its own share of this weird, like really
We are.
scary security state where they're just rounding people up.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of serious stuff that's going on right now, and to pretend like it's not, um, for example, people that are outside of the cities, maybe out in rural areas where they won't see, they really won't see this stuff aside from being on the news.
Right.
um, to that point, I want to touch base on something that a friend, acquaintance
Hmm.
from when I was younger, they had shared something, and it was an article, and the headline was "What White People Can Do to Help." And right away, I saw how some people they push back immediately, and they're like, yo, like, it's not just white people, and it's just, you know, and it reminded me a lot of when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, and how there was some significant confrontations and frictions. It's like, hey, all lives matter. And they're like, immediately, like, there's this kind of like, just, you know, it's a hard point. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that, where it's like, you know,
That's a great question, and I have several answers. You know, a little bit of my background. I was a high school teacher in a low-income neighborhood in Chicago South Side community, and in that capacity, when I first started teaching, even the first year that I started teaching, the first 2 weeks were not dedicated to the subject matter. The first 2 weeks were dedicated to getting to know the culture. What are the interests of my students? What do my students listen to? How do they feel about XYZ? And getting to know people in that way will deliver you the answers that you need as to what it is that's important to them, what it is that they value, what it is that they need. Obviously, you're going to come with your own sense of what people need in general, but it's kind of good to know where folks are coming from at the other end, especially if they're cultures that you haven't ever experienced on your own. That being said, it isn't something that's going to be covered over 2 weeks. It's something that I knew that I was going to discover over the course of a lifetime, because
right.
I'm literally trying to get into the shoes of somebody else, correct?
Yeah.
And so to come away and reflect and think, well, I got this down. I know what these folks need. And just saying these folks, right, as if we're that separate from each other, is already kind of building up a wall, right? So
Right.
we have to understand that we just need to constantly discover what it is that other folks are going through, and putting ourselves in their shoes, and maybe doing our own research as to what it is that is the problem. Um, Funny
I
enough.
want to interject really quick in
Right,
terms of
sure.
that research. Um, Something that had happened in a previous video that I made
Hmm.
discussing a protest actually that happened
Hmm.
in a block from my house,
Hmm.
where the governor resides,
Sure.
was that there was a healthcare worker that was protesting the protest of these. The protest was to stop the lockdowns, let people go back to their daily lives.
Okay.
Predominantly Republican,
Right.
supporting, you know, folks. And the healthcare worker, what I found to be so interesting is they had a hat, they had a "Make America Great Again" at the MAGA hat,
Hmm.
and yet they were protesting their own you know, network of political, you know, supporters. I asked the question, you know, if you were in a group of peers and you disagreed, you know, are you going to go along with the group think because it's easy and because to avoid the friction, be like water,
Hmm.
or would you
Hmm.
stand up even in the face of something that it was bigger than that one healthcare worker, the few that showed up?
Right.
Somebody attacked me right away in the feed, and they went hard in terms of just trying to break down any kind of communication. There just wasn't a communication. And I'm curious your thoughts on it. So you've talked about like getting into the culture, trying to understand the culture, and then seeing how you can engage and help work through you know, you're in classes, so you're trying to teach and educate. How was it that how did you find your way to a place where at least there could be some sort of a trust where they would be receptive to stuff that you're sharing, information you're sharing, and, you know, your kind of leadership?
Well, I mean, there you go. In the first couple of weeks, when I did ask them what sort of music they liked or what were their interests, I would actually look into it, do my own research. And so you'd come back the following day and, you know, say, hey, I do know about this, and this is what I found out. And it seems so mundane and simple, but if you don't show real authentic and genuine interest in what other people are doing, they're not going to really find much interest in, you know, in what you're doing or what
Yes,
you're
I had
trying
actually lost my
to
train
do.
of thought. It was the bias that I was going after. In the
Hmm.
comments, I had said, you know, can you show me, because they tried to make a point, and I just said, can you show me, you know, what this evidence, just show me, show
Right,
me what you
absolutely.
know. And they
Right,
started name calling and attacking me.
mhm,
And I said, well, hey, I'm asking because if I go and do the research, there's going to be a bias, and that's how it is. People are biased based on their own experiences. And that's really what I was getting at, is if you go and do your own research, you can, if you're really good and you train yourself and you take the time researching both sides of a debate, and actually are open to facilitating points of views that you may not really want to agree with, but there's some truths to it. Yeah, it can be beneficial, but I'm curious, as far as people in general that maybe don't have research backgrounds or don't make it an active process in how they dig into information. You know,
Well,
how,
that's very difficult. I mean, you do have to become proactive in taking a look at what the other side of any issue is, and the onus of that research shouldn't just be on the person who's being questioned. Um, right now would not be very prudent or pragmatic to go over to say the riot and start quizzing people on, well, what exactly is going wrong with your society, and why is it that you're so upset, and why are you rioting and looting. um, and it sounds funny right now, but sometimes some folks who are at a disadvantage don't have that kind of luxury of time to be able to be quizzed in that way. So it's also it's how is it that you're studying the situation. So I would ask a few questions in the classroom. I'd get some feedback, and then the onus rested on me to do most of the work, because obviously I'm the professional. I'm getting paid for this job, and some of that time was very time consuming. And so you'd come back home and you do your homework, as I'd say. So teachers do their homework and students do their homework, and that is what it takes to build those kinds of relationships. Now, we know ourselves with our own personal relationships that in itself is difficult. Asking people who we live with, how's it going? What's been going on in your life? What's your interest? What are you doing with it? And sometimes we can be a little bit too invasive in that questioning. And so there isn't a fine line as to what to do and what not to do. I think you have to find that perfect sweet spot of discovering both for yourself on your own and with the people or the person that you're trying to interact with.
so from our previous discussions, I'm aware that, and it's great insights that you've shared. Thank you. From your previous experience, right, late
Mm-hmm.
80s through the early 90s, right, there's a pretty significant international incident that had happened there as well, with the riots in LA.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you had your share of, and you were, is my understanding, you were in school at the time of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can you share kind of from your experience then to what you're seeing happening now? Is there like kind of some foresight where you're looking at it going, okay, there's a potential that this is going to happen? Like, are you seeing it escalating? Are you seeing reform?
This is definitely escalating at both an organic and non-organic level. My background in social sciences from the University of Chicago is one of the prisms I use to look at this situation, as well as my own personal experiences. And so I grew up in a time period which was extremely violent. Our homicide rate in 1992 was something like, in Chicago, was 925. With thousands of aggravated batteries and assault. And I was on the street a lot as a kid. And so I got to see a lot of violence. I got to see a lot of mob action. I got to see a lot of folks on the streets throwing Molotov cocktails at officers and that sort of thing. But that being said, what I'm looking at is, for instance, yesterday's situation. I'm looking at video where it shows clearly that someone broke a window, smashed a window.
This is this
And
individual with the black umbrella,
that's right.
respirator, dressed all in
That's right.
black,
Right.
white man.
And I've done work as a freelance journalist in the past for covering anti-war marches, and I can most definitively say that was probably an agent provocateur who was there to probably inflame the situation. I'll go on record for that too.
Well, there was so the Hennepin County, there was a live stream that just happened with the city, and there's a individual from law enforcement that has suggested that they've already identified that there were quite a few people that were not from Minneapolis that were involved. So there are people that are flooding in. Are those considered the opportunists?
I think so too. I think you have a variety of stakeholders and actors involved in this, in when these types of activities occur, when you have this huge, protests. You're going to have, the status quo in there, and then you're going to also have the regular protesters, and then you're going to have these fringe groups that come in, taking advantage of the situation. And it becomes a really difficult thing to tease all of that out, as you well know at this point, especially once this keeps moving. But what I'm seeing now is a moving from the south end of the city into other parts, and this is really more organic than anything else. So I don't know. I just have a really bad feeling about tonight.
That's what, yeah, tonight I'm a little concerned. I am going to be, I am meeting up with a few friends, and I had shared a little bit before the show. I had reached out to my network. Thankfully, there is a friend of mine that is going to meet up with me that is in the minority, an African-American Black male. That is also interested in documenting, and they're going to meet up with me as well as another individual. And I'd shared with you that initially I was really concerned and even going, I don't want to go there, make myself a target, or I'm not trying to facilitate or actually I'm not trying to be a part of any anarchy or chaos. Right. However, the protest, if it is necessary, based on the incident with George Floyd and his murder. But knowing that I'm going to be accompanied, or we're going to click up, and it's not just going to be, me with a bunch of white dudes or whatever, there is a sense of, one, I feel honored that, under the circumstances, considering that this is a race, it is a 100% race issue, and it's inequality.
Well, let me stop you right there. One of the key factors and determinants of this situation, which was not here or present in the 80s or 90s for myself and my generation that were having to deal with some of these very contentious issues on the ground, is the fact that your camera is not white or black. You have a means and a capacity to be able to be filming this and transmitting these things across the world, which is a great thing. And so these aren't devices that are also solely restricted to just a few. Thousands of people have the capacity to do so. So in that sense, this is going to play out very differently, because that's going to show the world what exactly is going on. Right. And that's a good thing. And
one of my concerns I have is that the protest that I went to Tuesday afternoon, where there was thousands and thousands of people at the location, 38th Chicago, where the incident happened, is that either there was so many people that the bandwidth of the towers couldn't handle it, and you couldn't do live streams. It was difficult to do any of that, or there is some theories that there was jamming taking place in order to limit the amount of communication that was happening in the area.
There might be a presence of some stingrays in the vicinity. I wouldn't doubt it.
Speculate on that. I personally believe it was that there were so many people in such a condensed area over, maybe 5, 6.
So let's back up a little bit here. Yeah. So there was a lot of this anti-war protest that occurred for the Iraq War. And one way for yourself as a media person is maybe to reach out to people who cover these stories and ask them, what do I need to look out for while I am proceeding as a professional to give the clearest amount of observation to the matter. One such person, for instance, is Dar Jamil, unembedded reporter from Iraq, or actually the unembedded reporter of Iraq. And he was an incredible mentor of sorts for myself, because I would constantly be asking him, well, what is going on in Iraq?
That's who you brought to Chicago University, correct?
Yeah, I brought him to a function, an event that I put together, a public forum in Chicago that took place at a nightclub, Sonotech nightclub, in 2005, I believe was the year. And this should be, if you really want to get to the heart of the matter, it should be a multi-generational response. So you want to discover things. So let's go back to that, what I did when I was a teacher in high school. So I asked the kids what's going on. What's the culture like? What are you interested in? Well, guess what? I also did the same with the staff. Maybe not as with a 10-point questionnaire type of activity, but just by having chats with them and talking with them, getting to know the community, and maybe even asking the parents, well, what are your interests and what are you valuing? What do you want out of this education for your children? That sort of thing. And so you as a professional can do the same in reaching out to these different media voices who were covering these types of protests in the past and ask them point blank, well, what am I looking at here? You know,
That's
and
great.
I'm sure they're gems to talk with, you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting the vibe that's happening right now. I've been hearing a lot more sirens. So there's a fire station that's
Hmm.
not too far from here. I know right now in St. Paul there's a massive police presence in some business areas. My understanding is the Army National Guard is potentially, allegedly, being activated to come in, try to restore some form of security in the communities impacted. Whether or not that's actually going to happen, we will find out. But I do know that this protest that's supposed to be happening here in a few hours, there's a little bit of apprehension. You know, the folks that I've spoke with that are either going to go and participate. I do have some friends that are very adamant about what's happening, in the sense that they may not even actually see the violence and the anarchy as being a bad thing, because they've referenced the past in that after events like this, and I'm blanking on this individual's name. It was another black man that was murdered, but there was a riot, and they are claiming that it was many years after that until there was another incident of any sort. So they're correlating widespread protesting and the violence that ensued to peace and to equality. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, let's back up a little bit, and what I'm also sensing and hearing is that you, as a person, are going through a traumatic event, just as much as a lot of folks out there who are
Exactly.
in your region, in your area. And one good thing to do is find de-stressors and ways to decompress, even during this time period.
Yeah.
Water, for instance, is a good way to kind of decompress and de-stress oneself. And so keeping yourself hydrated is a way to de-stress and decompress your body at the physiological level.
I've been
Um,
chugging water because I want to
mm,
be hydrated tonight, but then I'm
yep.
realizing I'm like, man, I'm
Hmm.
gonna have to piss a lot.
Yeah,
So
you are, and you'll have time to be able to do it on some street, I'm sure, actually.
yeah,
But just and humor. There you go. Smiling and just laughing is another way to uh, to engender certain types of chemical activities. Again, these are things that you could look up online for yourself as a professional, so that you can know what it is that you need to do for yourself. Because if the observer, the person who's trying to capture the moment, is off whack, not going to be it's not going to give you the best picture either, you know.
yeah,
You,
it's trying to be, and I've talked about this in I had done some introspective review, the first protest that had actually happened in my community. I was emotional at the time based on
mhm,
a number of factors, but one of which was family's business got shut. Of my sister's business was
right.
shut down by
Hmm.
the government, and then she was denied unemployment. And I felt like that was just massively. It was a massive shortcoming in government, to shut, like, how it just didn't make sense to me. So I was very frustrated. This protest happens. Long story short, I went into it, and the first 10 minutes I was there, you could see a significant difference in how I was approaching it, the reporting or the
Yeah,
documentation, as opposed to,
yeah.
once I stopped myself and I'm like, holy shit, I'm in the middle of this thing that's, one day ago, I would have looked at this and been like, whoa, like, slow down. But so that's where I'm at right now, is just thinking, okay, what am I actually trying to do here? I'm trying to be as unbiased as is humanly possible. I'm trying to document a series of events. I'm trying to not agitate. I'm trying to not become a victim. There's a lot of things I'm trying not to do, and I guess maybe even in doing that, there'll be somewhat of a skewed perspective. But
Well, a good deal of Americans right now are emotionally compromised in this situation. I mean, we've had a double whammy at this point, with the coronavirus situation, and now with these riots, or this riot that is occurring, which I'm also hearing is starting to pick up in LA, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure about that.
there's a few different metropolitans actually.
So and on my end, as a yoga teacher and also as someone who practices on a daily level hatha yoga, I try to find ways to distance myself from my emotions and my thoughts, because I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not my feelings, as one of my mentor teachers tells me, right? Tells us. Uh, so we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings. So I find that space for about an hour and a half every day, and it can be done through guided meditation sessions that last 5-10 minutes or anything like that. But that's it's a great way it's a great thing to reset every day as much as possible, maybe 2-3 times a day, so that you aren't completely emotionally compromised. Now, we're not robots, right? We can't just do that automatically, but with time and practice, you're able to do this just a little bit better. And so that's just one of the solutions for that. Given the fact that you're in the middle of it right now, it's a little bit more difficult, but maybe take the time, pause at some point, and just reflect, take a big big breath in, and give yourself that space, because that self-care is what's going to keep you going in the long run.
Sure. Thankfully I am slightly removed from it. I just moved across the river. The community though, I had lived there for well over a decade. And I was hearing the sirens and helicopters all night.
Mm-hmm.
Had friends that are still in that community reaching out. They know that I'm prior service and I have firearms for my own personal security. And
Right.
they're asking me, hey, if this gets much worse, what's the potential that you could end up being over here, right? Like there was a definite concern for safety, and there was, in fact, a female that had reached out that it was very obvious that they were terrified. They could hear screaming outside, breaking glass, and they have absolutely no personal defense mechanisms. And to what extent it would escalate, who knows? There's always, bad actors within groups, and how far they're going to take it, you just can never be sure. So, yeah, that was.
I think taking care of our physical safety is obviously very always important, but in these times is even more important. And there's pepper sprays for people to carry around. It doesn't need to be as lethal as a gun, but those are pretty lethal. Not lethal, but those are pretty great tools that can be used in a very dire situation.
The problem now is like that provocateur that you were mentioning. I'd seen the video of this individual. He was all blacked out, a full face respirator. Mace isn't going to do anything against somebody like that. Like, this dude was covered from head to toe.
If possible, being in groups of 3 or 4 is one of the other means of being able to be in safety, right? It's having folks around you, friends around you, not traveling alone in these kinds of situations, and just looking for trouble in a sense. Not that we're not to blame the victim, but if you're going to go to a march by yourself alone, you're going to invite a little level of risk.
Numbers, right?
So,
well, hey, I'm just noticing the time right now.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
Talked for quite a bit longer.
Yeah, sure.
How about I just stop this and start it up again so that we can continue this? Is it you all right with that?
That's fantastic. We could do that.
All right, here, give me 1 second. Okay, so we're back. Safety numbers. Go ahead, please.
Right. So, yeah, that's one way to kind of, when you're in this kind of situations, is to stay safe. And safety in numbers is obviously one of the ways. Another thing that I do is I carry a flashlight just in case, because it's, especially in the dark, it gets dark. And so you need something like that. If you're in a professional, if you're coming to this as a professional observer, having a press credential is obviously really important. Some type of tag that's along your chest or something.
That I have my hat that says my small LLC, which is a media company, and I have my business cards, but I don't have this badge, and I don't have the time now to actually create this thing. So, well,
let me tell you the story on one of the marches that I covered, this anti-war march, and I had been in a situation where a few of the aging provocateurs had come over to me and started to badger me, and also starting to molest me in a sense. And at one point, they surrounded me, they corralled me in a certain way. And then one of those injured provocateurs came from behind me and literally bent down, and someone else just pushed me. One from their group pushed me. I went flying
School
and
right?
yeah, and I fell on the ground, and then they got up and they started chanting that, you know, he's the one, he's causing mischief, and they pointed me out to a white shirt sergeant, and the white shirted sergeant came over and was about to arrest me, and then I pulled out my press credential, and he was still going to take me away, and then I pointed. Luckily, we were right next to a federal building. I pointed to my right and pointed to a camera that was there, and I said, "We are being recorded as we speak, and this whole interaction was recorded. So if you put me in jail, if you lock me up, I will be talking to my lawyer right away about the incident, and we will have that recording, and people are going to go to jail." And he automatically stopped what he was doing, and he just told me in his nice, kind words, "Get the fuck out of here." And that's how I left that scene. So there's a lot of layers of protection there as an individual who's walking into a situation like that.
Attribution and accountability, which is exactly why this is happening, is maybe 20 years ago, there weren't cameras in everybody's pockets, right? There weren't video cameras.
Absolutely.
And now it's everybody is able to document. And that's where, you know, last night, all you had to do is bounce around through different live streams on whichever social media platform you're accustomed to, and you were getting 5, 6 different angles of similar events that are taking place. The individual that was shot and killed last night, alleged looter trying to break into a pawn shop, the arsons that were taking place, you were just seeing it from all the different angles. So there's a lot of documentation. It seems like in your case specifically, in George Floyd's case, that it's an agent for change, is documentation. And that's
absolutely, it's a major agent for change. I sued the Chicago Public Schools at the federal level. That lawsuit lasted 7 years, and prior to that I had sued them at the state level. But it wasn't until I went through the federal level that they started to really consider what it is that they were doing. But one of the things that the lawyer pointed out that was fantastic on my part was just the amount of documentation I had for the case, which was literally 7 inches of documents for what had transpired.
Let me ask you, what was the case?
The case itself was a violation of civil rights against me, and we were fighting for the First Amendment right and a number of other things. They had sent me to a quote-unquote rubber room in Chicago, which is where they send these so-called teachers that are, have some type of suspicious activities or something going on. And so I found those places to be just zones where they would send both blacks, Latinos, and older folks. Yeah, they were kind of like silence rooms, rubber rooms. They're kind of like indefinite detention rooms of sorts, bureaucratic, Kafkaesque, whatever you want to call them. And I found that to be obviously very deplorable. So the lawsuit went through. The background story to that is that in my second year, I began to see a lot of egregious activities in the school where I was teaching, such as, for instance, our dean of discipline robbed a bank. And so here you have a dean of discipline collecting 3 paychecks, one as a dean of discipline, another one as the community liaison, and also as a coach at the school, who on the weekend decides to rob a bank, and the cops are chasing him all over the place. So when I say egregious, they're pretty egregious activities that were occurring not just outside by some of the staff members, but also in the school. And once I started popping my head up and talking about these things, some people just didn't like it. And so then you get targeted, right?
So it sounds, not to cut you off.
Yeah, sure.
What it sounds like from your previous experiences, both in the legal system as well as your upbringing and your time in the late 80s, early 90s in Southside Chicago, there's a couple of aspects or elements that were agents of change. One is documentation, coverage that can aid attribution and accountability for a situation. And then another element would be persistence and follow through whether that's state or federal level, to go all the way to the top. How?
And let's add one more, concrete, physical, concrete, real support from, say, lawyers and from people who are able to provide some level of concrete assistance, not thoughts and prayers, you know. Well, I had a friend, for instance, who actually paid for the lawyer that I finally was able to get. But if it wasn't for him, and he paid the whole tab, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have had that lawyer taking care of my case. And a lot of folks don't, you know, they send these thoughts and these prayers, but that doesn't do anything for a position, someone in my position.
Earlier discussion about, you know, what can white people do,
right?
Aside from sending thoughts, prayers, and, you know, posting.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it was very demoralizing to have gone through that entire period, and I did not receive more than maybe perhaps a coffee cup from the community that was supposed to help me, right? Or if anyone is really supposed to help you. And fortunately, like I said, I had one individual who decided, hey, this one is getting a really, really short end of the stick, and maybe I should help him out.
Curiosity, this individual that helped you, were they in a similar demographic as you? Were they?
He is now a retired customs lawyer in his early 70s. And he actually was in the gay rights movement, the struggle. He funded people like Harvey Milk. And so he knew, he had that rapport. He understood very well that what I was going through was something at an epic level. And also that I was being bullied by a system, and that if someone wasn't able to help out and intervene at that point, that I would be crushed by it. And so, yes, he definitely knew some of what I was going through just because of his own personal experience with the gay rights movement in his time period.
Regarding experience, you know, somebody had made a comment earlier this morning. I was digging through, you know, the stream of content that is becoming ever larger of unfolding events. Mm-hmm. And they had made this comment about how the shop owner, that there was a looter breaking in, shop owner shoots and kills this individual. That shop owner is in jail right now. The cop that had their knee on George Floyd and ultimately led to his death is not in jail. And I'm curious, you know, this, just this idea that this person is still, you know, at home. And to my understanding, they were doxxed, all their information went public. A mob went there to surround the house, and, you know, who knows how far it would have escalated, but it sounds like they're even there's law enforcement there to protect him and his family.
Well, let's just let's pause right there. Now, I, for instance, do not have the legal background to understand those two different situations. To you and I, it looks like a miscarriage of justice right there and then. To us, it's plain and clear that there's a murder of this person. And so we need to maybe investigate that as professionals with, say, the local legal counsel, and ask them, what are you looking at? What are you seeing him? Getting them on record, or maybe in an interview, and asking them personally, is this a miscarriage of justice? Why is this going on? They might give us a better understanding of why it's been doled out this way in this particular instance.
Why they were allowed to go home.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
They're fired, but why were they allowed to go home? Is it because
the state's prosecutor might be developing a case? Now, again, I don't know. And so I can't really speculate on that.
I think this is great that you say that, though, because unfortunately, more often than not, I'm finding that, you know, when we try to facilitate this type of dialogue, these, questioning and asking these difficult questions, it's too easy for many to just go right into to assert something.
And let's go back to the case that I had to deal with the Chicago Public Schools. It was at a federal level, and it was tedious and methodical, and the approach had to be done in a very dry, systematic way, in which case I had to, develop my documentation and get it printed out and that sort of thing. And so these kinds of things aren't fun to do. They're exhausting, time-consuming, and they're a financial drain to yourself personally and to the lawyers and the people involved trying to help out in the case. And so, but these are very serious matters that need to be tended to in a very sophisticated, comprehensive, and professional manner if we want to get something out of the system. But at the same time, we also have a system that's rigged. I sent you an article of these two great lawyers that we talked about before, who recently were stabbed to death in their own homes in Oak Park. These are social justice warriors who'd been working on cases like this, and they mysteriously somehow happened to be killed in their own homes. So you have this level of corruption that's working at the very top.
What
And
was
so
the case? Weren't they underway on a case when the,
one of the, I think one of them had been on the board had been on, presided over a hearing last year for 4 cops accused of covering up a probe into the 2014 Laquan McDonald shooting.
and that's
And that's what,
disturbing.
right.
That's extremely disturbing.
It is
What were
extremely,
their names again?
their names, and I have this
You have
pulled
it
up
up.
right
Oh, I
here.
wasn't
This is
sure if you
fantastic.
had
Oh, I
the.
keep like 75 tabs pulled up. Thomas E. Johnson, who was 69 years old, and Leslie Ann Jones, who was 67 years old, were found late Monday inside their Oak Park home. And these folks had multiple sharp force injuries.
Yeah, so this is social justice activists that were legal representatives that were focusing specifically on corruption and cover up of law enforcement over the death of a minority.
Right, absolutely.
It's extremely concerning.
It's extremely concerning. I'm glad that you at least appreciate it in that sense. There are people who I've had arguments with this in the last 24 hours, and they're like, well, that doesn't mean anything. I go, this is the Chicago way. We had a Chicago Board of Ed president who was found laying face down in the river, who had been somehow killed, and nobody found out who it was that did it. And there was some type of cover up that occurred with that. And so someone from my background, a Latino who's gone to the University of Chicago, who's obviously intelligent, you would hope, right? Has had to deal with these types of racial barriers all his life. And so on top of which, I grew up in a neighborhood just west of Bridgeport, which is the Daily Stronghold. So I got to see a lot of the political machinations behind this corruption personally. And so you're speaking to someone who's seen it with his own eyes, and then to have to present this to people and have them scoff at you, that in itself is very time consuming, and it's taxing on me as an individual. And so how can I get ahead in life just in a normal way if I have that level of pushback from folks, and
No.
so it gets kind of tough.
So in a sense of time, I really want to get this put together and uploaded, and I need to get over to
Sure.
this.
But just let me finish with that point really quick.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
But imagine me, who is in much better, quote unquote, much better shape, even though I'm still not in that upper middle class bracket, but who's in much better shape than these poor folks out there, some of them who are my former students, who've never seen anything above $10,000 a year in financial capital. Imagine them having to deal with these types of barriers and the legal challenges, the institutional racism, these types of challenges. You're placing a great onus, and not just you, but just some Americans are placing a great onus of burden on top of these folks when you start saying, well, there's a different way for you to go about this, when in fact there isn't.
Yeah, I'd seen a post, and whether or not it was actually JFK that had said it, I believe that's who it was. The attribution was given to, but it said something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing here, that when peaceful means of protest fail, the alternative becomes the violent protest.
Right.
Something
right.
along those lines. And I mean, as much as you want to believe that, there could be a peaceful resolve, if it continues to repeat itself over and over. And this brings me to a thought that I had regarding these social justice warriors that were, murdered. Why do you think, and it reminds me of the conversation we had before we started this conversation, where I said, I feel like anything I say, the minute the words can be minced, I could become a target. It's like I could become attacked. So it seems like maybe a reason that there aren't conversations is either one, people just stay silent because they're afraid. They're afraid of like how people are going to come after them if they try to speak out, and if they, how they're going to be marginalized. But also just the dynamic in how conversations happen these days is, what had another conversation with another friend earlier that was trying to convince me not to go, and they're just concerned for my safety. And they're saying, regardless, what you go and do, and there's a good chance it won't do anything. Like, it's not, there are people that they have their opinions, they have their beliefs, and anything outside of that, it's like you're labeled a communist, or you're labeled, a fascist, or it's just an immediate snap judgment polarization. And they're saying, dude, there is no room for common ground anymore. There is no room for discussion. And to the point, it seems like there's this cyclical, systematic issue that keeps perpetuating itself based on breakdown in communications, based on, these divides that continue to become larger and larger and larger, simply because communication in and of itself is completely fractured. I mean, would you agree?
I would agree, and this is something that both our major political parties are at fault with. They've brought this conversation down to the level of just name calling, literally.
You're wrong, like pointing fingers.
Right, and pointing fingers. So we have the war of the roses, is what I call it, right? And based on these false dichotomies of bad and good, and so this breakdown of communication is there, but we also have the opportunity to just have these conversations with people, with each other. Now, I've traveled in 33 states of this country on various occasions, on road trips. I've gone into a lot of these rural areas. I have spoken with people, lovely people. I love my America. And it's incredible that when you approach and ask about what is it going on in your own life, how open they are with revealing that to you, and being a wonderful guest in their communities. And I think we need to have more of those conversations occurring in general, for us to get to the bottom of the situation and find out for ourselves what is that's going on. Because most of us at the end of the day just want to have a nice, peaceful life, and that's what we're looking for. Now, on the other end, I think there's a lot of people that also forget that there is a concomitant obligation to democracy. In order to preserve this democracy, or what little we have of it, and nurture it in the healthiest manner, we also have to have some level of participation with the democracy, and that isn't going to happen overnight, and that is a practice that needs to occur on a daily level. Here we go back to my friend who funded the lawsuit. He's the one who actually mentioned that to me. And so for myself, I do a little bit of research every day on the things that matter to other people. And so that maybe I can modify my own thoughts. Maybe I can improve on them. Maybe I can improve also on my behavior and be much more inclusive in the welfare of not just myself, but of others. And so that's a formula that I've been using, and that seems to be working for me, at least.
It's great insight, as always.
Thank you.
Luis. Was there anything else?
One last thing, I think right now, looking at the numbers, looking at the situation, I take a look at a lot of data, and I take a look at a lot of articles across the country and the globe. I think for ourselves as a country, we're in a nation of trauma. We need to start looking into what our emotional health is at and how we can improve on that. Secondly, I think we need to really have the middle class and upper middle class really step up to the plate and start providing something a little bit more than thoughts and feelings, because that is not going to cut it. And looking at the numbers, I do not see that that's going to improve our situations. In fact, I honestly, from the bottom of my heart and from all the intellectual analysis that I can do, I really think that this is going to go even farther deeper into the hole if these groups who have the resources don't start stepping up to the plate. And I don't mean just sending out a check to the Breast Cancer Society, which is taking about 80% of it, okay? So I mean real concrete, grassroots level type of action.
I'd agree. Actions speak a hell of a lot more than words. And
right.
you know.
And take care of yourselves, please.
Oh, certainly.
First comes you. The revolution is within. Remember that.
Respect.
Respect, mate.
Luis, I appreciate you coming on as always. Thank you for sharing your insights and having this conversation with me. You take care of yourself down there. I don't know if there's anything that's really happening in Chicago. Are you seeing any kind of anything?
I think we're seeing a plateau to some extent of the coronavirus situation, but I'm looking carefully at the numbers.
Civil unrest.
And civil unrest, no.
Okay,
no,
so there's no protest. I heard LA.
Not yet, thankfully.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
All right. Well, with that, for all the viewers, listeners, thanks for joining us. We'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the about section below. For any information on Luis, it'll also be down there. Until next time, you guys stay safe out there.
Thank you so much again. Okay.